We're going to do the first of what will be an ongoing series of what we call One Great Ideas, little 10-minute pieces by some really terrific people. And one of the first terrific people I'm pleased to bring to the stage is Chris Coulter, the CEO, co-CEO of GlobeScan, to talk about, in the low trust world we're living in, how do we do better? Please welcome Chris Coulter.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm good, thank you. I got a clicker. We have a clock. That's very calming to have the clock. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Joel. Thanks, John. Thanks, Ellie, for inviting me. I recall when I started at GlobeScan 18 years ago, one of my jobs, perhaps the most important job I had, was to take the Green Biz newsletters out of the mail, open the binder thing, put it in and close it. It was like a paper copy encyclopedia that we built, that was built over the years. So I have very warm feelings and fondness for it. And it was nice to start at 12 years old back 18 years ago. I'm gonna talk today about this shift that we need to kind of get our heads around. And I think most of us in the room do, but I think more broadly, societally, we need to figure out how to go from a VUCA world, which I'll describe, and some of you have heard the term, to a different kind of VUCA, which I'll also describe, which hopefully is a novel term for us and one we can embrace collectively. The VUCA that we're familiar with is the military jargon related to a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And it's something that we sort of latched onto, backed into, based on our scanning of societal views and stakeholder perspectives and some of the difficulty that our clients inside companies and multilateral organizations and NGOs had in trying to plan and decide the future that they wanted to be a part of and how they could manifest that future. It became increasingly difficult. And unfortunately, the VUCA term is that much more applicable and relevant today than it was a couple of years ago, which is really a real challenge and a difficulty. It's 2.5 minutes before midnight, doomsday clock, little visual beside the president is quite striking. If you ever want some uplifting reading, look at that website and review how close we are to the apocalypse. So this is something that we understand and we feel and we know the challenges are related to it. And one of the indicators of this and one of the difficulties we have in breaking out of this VUCA world, especially in business and government, is an ongoing pernicious level of low trust that the global public invests in us. We can see there's relatively high levels of trust in academic and scientific institutions, ACU being a great example of how it can rise above some of these issues and be highly trusted. NGOs, as we just heard, playing an important role, and the public generally trusts and engages around the NGO agenda. But at the bottom, we have global business, national governments, and press and media that continue to languish in a very low level, relatively low level element of trust, which makes it very difficult for us to be as bold as we need to do to try and transform economy and society as we need to do at the pace that's required given the challenges. So this is a fundamental structural challenge that we have when it comes to trust and conversations and engagement. It makes the transactions related to what we have to do that much more difficult. So the implications of that are pretty broad. One is that there's an increasing trend among the global public to support regulation of business in ways that forces them to be responsible. It's good, but it's not exactly the most optimal state to be because it depends on which definition of responsibility you're looking at. We see increasing volatility and lately a growing sense of anxiety and perceived seriousness of a range of environmental issues. And the public points to business as the primary culprit and required responder to environmental issues. We see things like a sense of increasing agreement that companies don't pay their fair share of taxes, and that populism that's affected governments across the world is likely to be bubbling just below the surface for business in many ways, and sometimes quite rightfully so. And we have then increasing resonance with campaigns from NGOs. We've got all kinds of political volatility, populism that's exploding, and we have this transparency driver that's pushing all of these things in an agenda. So there's lots of significant and relevant implications for this low trust world that we're dealing with, especially when we're trying to get on the front foot and get to a place that we know we need to get to and we can kind of see sometimes, but it's difficult and we get distracted often. So that's the VUCA world. Depressing, scary, not super inspiring. So how can we get from that type of VUCA to this VUCA, which is a Zulu word that means wake up? And this comes from our board member, Gail Clintworth, who's South African, and picked up the Zulu phrase last year, and it's a very beautiful, elegant counterpoint to the other VUCA. And how can we begin to get above some of the fray and the friction? How do we look beyond just the events in the last couple of years to a stronger, clearer, resonant vision that we know will be more difficult to throw us off the pathway that's required? So how do we get to this wake-up VUCA that we need? Well, I wanted to talk about two broad elements. One being a microeconomic sort of piece and focus at the business unit, the business as the unit of analysis. And then secondly, I wanted to shift to a more macro, broad-scale conversation that we can all be participating in a collective way. So at a micro level, what we need is more leadership, obviously. Leadership from businesses, from individuals and businesses, but we need a subtle nuance of leadership that's recognized and get better at engaging stakeholders inside and outside our organizations to try and shift that trust dynamic that we're struggling with so intensely around. How that recognition can help fuel a demonstration effect for other organizations, for other types of businesses, to showcase what's truly possible. And that demonstration effect, I think, is extraordinarily powerful, especially when we look to emerging markets and all of the different experiences, challenges, and optimism and energy that exists in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And that recognition of leadership is something that we should be focusing on as well as leadership. And if we look historically in some of the work that we've done, in 1997, we began tracking with a panel of global stakeholders around their vision of what corporate leadership looked like, which companies were excelling the most in sustainability. And in 1997, we'll look at a couple of tranches over the years between 97 and 2016. But in 97, which company comes to mind as being the pinnacle of sustainability leadership back 19 years ago, 20 years ago? Apart from GlobeScan. GlobeScan always, we downplay that. We've got the top 5 companies that were mentioned by elite stakeholders from business, government, NGOs, and academia. It was Dow Chemical, it was Monsanto, 3M, DuPont, and Shell. That was the pinnacle of leadership back in 97. Authentic leadership, true leadership, credible leadership. That's what it looked like back in 97. If we move to 2004, there was a new wave of leadership that came on, especially personified by BP and Shell, talking about big issues in a big way. We know Beyond Petroleum. We know the speech at Stanford that Lord Brown gave. We know that Shell began to talk about sustainable development explicitly, using that term that was always hidden or embarrassing for some people, and put it on the pages of The Economist, for example, and brought that out. And then we had Interface come on with Ray Anderson's work in those years. If we look a little bit farther ahead in 2010, we have another set of leaders that pop up. Walmart, which was a company that wasn't especially endearing to this group of stakeholders around the world, but because of their boldness, because of the impact of changing the market, they earned that recognition of leadership from sustainability experts across the world. And then some new players like GE, M&S, and a little company called Unilever that all of a sudden came on the floor in 2010. And if we look at 2016, we have a similar set of companies, but then some new faces that have also arisen that are starting to describe the characteristics of leadership. Those include IKEA and Tesla for the first time. So there's an extraordinary dynamic level of evolution of leadership if we look back in time and try and see how this evolves. And we know that we're on the cusp of another set of leadership agenda that's probably coming. So that's exciting and encouraging, and we need to keep watching and learning from the past in many ways. Now, a lot of these companies are leaders and recognized as leaders for all kinds of reasons, because they're transparent, relatively, because they report effectively, because they have fantastic goals and they deliver on them, because they have wonderful leadership that are able to drive forward an agenda passionately and sometimes charismatically, and because they have fantastic initiatives or have invented some disruptive approach to sustainability that earns that recognition. So lots of reasons, and they change and they sort of morph depending on the company at the time we're looking at. But there's also something, I think, deeper and more systemic that these companies have in spades compared to their peers and over the years in the era. And that's this notion of responsiveness, that they're able to deeply understand, listen, and understand the external context, the needs, the expectations, the challenges, sometimes the anxieties, and understand that fluidity of that dynamic ecosystem and begin to respond and identify and have a point of view as to what's really strategic for them to go forward. And they're all also able to take their internal structures, which tend to be siloed and pretty hierarchical and decentralized in some cases, and find ways to engage together, work together, create alignment and prioritization so that there's a matching of the external and internal universes that lead to that ability to be leaders and recognize leaders in ways. So that's a powerful piece of it. At the macro level, switching from the micro level, one of the broadest challenges I think we have, and Annie spoke to it a little bit, relates to this idea of how do we talk about this thing called sustainability. Joel's book talks about full spectrum sustainability, a powerful but complex subject, and how do we begin to engage people across the world. And I like the analogy of the beach. And if we think we want to engage people or have people come to a beach, if we're a resort, we want to sell a vacation package, typically we begin with the beach. We say, this place looks pretty beautiful. There's wonderful people walking around. There's umbrella drinks perhaps. There's surf. There's beautiful temperatures. Come to this place. This is what we're talking about. We broadly and historically have said, there's a thing called a beach. There's some elements to it that we're not really sure what it looks like, but it sounds pretty good, and it's better than this place, we think. We're not so sure. And what we want you to do is to get some inoculations, get a passport, line up at an airport, go through security, sit on a tin can for 12 hours, and we'll get you someplace. And that, in a perverted way, is the way we've been talking and engaging about sustainability. First of all, we're not clear what the beach is, what it looks like. I think it's probably Copenhagen. It's probably as close as we can come to what the beach looks like. And then we have not been talking about that as a draw systemically enough, or clearly enough, or consistently enough to try and wake people up and have them be drawn to this compelling vision that's irrefutably better than what we have today and what our children deserve. Thank you very much.